Thank you, Madam Chair. This government has heard from many athletes across Canada, and they've heard from me, and we are all pressing the minister for the same thing, that an independent body be established that has the mandate to investigate claims made by athletes of sexual abuse or harassment in sport. I'm sure we are all familiar with the history of sexual abuse and harassment in sport, so I won't go into the many well-documented cases that have been reported in the media in recent months. It is reasonable to refer to this situation as a crisis, and a crisis that requires swift and decisive action. Recently publicized was an open letter from a coalition of multi-sport organizations, researchers, and retired athletes that proposed that the government established a single independent arm's-length system of education, investigation, and compliance. The NDP also calls for the establishment of such a body. Canada is at a crossroads in its efforts to eliminate the scourge of gender-based violence in sport, the letter said. It is clear that the 1996 Sport Canada policy to prevent harassment and abuse in sport has not been effective. Sport-by-sport self-regulation means that there will be as many different approaches to gender-based violence as there are sports bodies, a situation that is inconsistent with the principles of uniform treatment and the values of Canadian sport. Here's the process now for an athlete who has been sexually abused or harassed. An athlete must go to their national sport organization with their harassment or abuse complaint, and the NSO hires an investigator to investigate. They can either find their own investigator, many admit that they don't know how to do this, and they can go to the Sport Dispute Resolution Center and access the list of investigators they have compiled, which I believe they've spent a considerable amount of time compiling. Either way, the athlete has no input into who will do the investigating, while the NSO has total control and pays for the investigator. Secondly, the SDRCC mainly deals with disputes between national team athletes and their NSOs. It does not hear disputes for anyone who is not a national team athlete, and that means over 99% of all athletes. Only Athletics Canada has its own ombudsman office, and that hires independent investigators and publishes their reports. This is not an athlete-centered approach to dealing with this crisis. It's doubtful that many young people will subject themselves to it, knowing that they must go through their national sport organization first. This setup will discourage those who have been abused from coming forward. The minister must make this more independent and athlete-centered. She must change the process so that the athlete can go directly to the Sport Dispute Resolution Center, make the complaint, after which the SDRCC would help to choose, with the athlete's approval, the investigation team. The SDRCC would pay for the investigation, not the NSO, and the report would be made public. This is the approach the government would the approach the government would take to this serious issue if it was serious about addressing it. The minister is giving most of the authority in this endeavor to the organization that represents virtually all abusers, as history tells us, the Coaching Association of Canada. Additionally, all people with a complaint about harassment or abuse in sport could use this service, not just national team athletes, and not just athletes, employees, volunteers, everyone who has alleged abuse or harassment within Canadian sport should have access to this investigative service. When women started coming forward about a certain former Canadian Olympic Committee executive, most were not athletes. They were employees, consultants, and volunteers. The COC interviewed every one of them, but to this day has not made the report public, and most would probably be resolved through mediation and would not require a lengthy investigation. The point is that this government has chosen to completely ignore advice from leading sports researchers and scholars in this country.